Hi, I'm Kristen. Welcome back to week 2 of the Scrap Fabric Love Sew Along. Thanks for everybody who's told me that you're doing this with me and for all the photos of your progress that have been up on Instagram and Facebook, and I've had a few by email as well. I'm going to show you some of those later. If you missed week 1, just head to my channel homepage and it's the video just before this one, so you should be able to find it there and catch up. The blocks are super quick, so you absolutely have plenty of time to join in. So what I'm gonna do this week is talk about my progress. So I'm sat in a kind of funny place in my sewing room so that I can get a better angle of the blocks I've finished. And I'll show you some other photos of those. And then I'm also gonna show you the progress of some of the folk who are doing the sew along with you, maybe yours if you sent me in a photo. And then I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do in terms of layout to finish it off. So obviously this is not enough, you know, it looks like a lot of blocks, but it's not enough to make a sort of throw size quilt, which is what I'm aiming for. So I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do to make this bigger. And then I went a bit funny with, so I've got a bunch of layout options. I've got a baby quilt size, and I'll give you the measurements for all the other bits you would need to finish off your quilt for that size. I've got 3 or 4 options for a lap quilt, and then queen size as well. Obviously, I've mentioned previously you don't have to do enough blocks for a full quilt. There's going to be smaller projects that you could finish with these, of course. I'm going to talk about those next week because I'm thinking by that time you might know like if you've done loads of blocks and you're doing a lap size, you might have 1 or 2 spare and you want a project for those. And you also might know at that point that you're not really going to do any more than the 4 that you've already got on your cutting table, and we'll come up with something that you can do with those. So that's the idea. So this week, so layout, I'm not finished with what we're doing this week. Right, so layouts and all of that. And then I promised we were going to have a chat about different options for the background. So I've used, as you can see, lots of scrappy black in the background. And so my background is going to be all black, but you might not have that many scraps in one color. I'm going to talk about different things you could do for the background of your quilt to make that make sense or still look cool and modern and stuff. And then finally, last thing, just briefly, I'm going to talk about how you can do this quilt as you go. I'm going to be doing this one on the long arm. And as I've said before, I'm going to have my pal Tom come on the last week and talk about how he would quilt it on a domestic machine with a walking foot. So we'll cover those. But today I'll just briefly point you to and explain how you could do this quilt as you go. And then I've had a few, not many to be honest, but a few questions from folk. So I'll do a little brief answering of those questions at the end. So that's the plan for this week. I hope you've been having fun making the blocks. I have. Before I show you my progress, I want to show you some of the amazing photos people have been sending in to me on Instagram, Facebook, and some people have emailed them to me. So many different approaches to this block, so many different color choices, all really cool. So I'm going to show you those. There's even someone who's finished their own quilt top already. Wow. So here's those photos now, and I'll come back and show you what I've got done. So these are in no particular order, guys. And if there's an @ symbol, that means that's the person's Instagram handle. And if it's their name, then I probably got it from Facebook or email. I just love all the different approaches that people have taken to this. If you sent me a photo and you don't see it here, it isn't because I didn't like your blocks. I probably just got disorganized and didn't see the post. I'm a bit social media challenged sometimes. So just send me an email and remind me, and I'll show it next time for sure, because I'm loving looking at all of the different ways that you guys have chosen to put these together. This is the hashtag to use on Instagram, and also the hashtag to search if you want to see what other people are posting and their block progress. Okay, so my progress. Well, so you can see I've got a bunch of blocks up on the design. Well, there's 20 here. And 20 is what I kind of laid out when I sort of designed the quilt for myself for a throw size, including some what I'm calling sashing rows or spacing rows. It's not going to be sashing around all the blocks. Just give you some spacing. But anyways, I'm getting to that in a minute. But this is how many blocks I wanted for the quilt. So I toyed with making a 5th row in a different color, but I decided against it because I couldn't find crumb blocks I'd already made that sort of went with this color scheme. And I also toyed with replacing this with something, the purple. I didn't feel like that. Last week I talked about you needed the contrast between the central cross and the background, and these clearly have it, and that not so much. But by the time I figured that out, I'd already cut out all the pieces for the cross blocks, and so I kind of just decided to go with it and let the purple grow on me. I don't hate it, but I would prefer it if it was like a shade lighter or brighter, do you know what I mean? Anyway, so this is ready to become, for me to start cutting out. I've cut out quite a few of the sizes that I need for those spacing sashing rows that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And so I'm pretty far advanced with this. It was pretty quick to put these blocks together, which I think some of you were saying on Instagram and various places as well. So I've also been working on the red and white test blocks that I showed you last week. I said I wasn't going to make any more of those. I didn't, but I was going to add it to some other orphan blocks and things like that. So I'll show you a little bit after I talk about the layout that I'm going to do for this version. I'll show you kind of my progress on the more abstract one, which is kind of more of like an improv orphan block mashup thing. But I know that there are some people, I'm aware there's some people who told me this is their first ever sew along, and it's mine too. And so I'm conscious I don't want to be confusing you by showing you my strange improv one in the middle of talking about the layouts. So let's talk about the standard group of layouts that I've kind of prepared. Obviously you can do your own thing. So first size, you can make a baby quilt. It'd take 9 blocks, 2 what I'm calling sashing rows. So I've used white here so that you can see the components that make up the layout. So you can see there's squares in between the rows. So those are 4.5-inch squares unfinished. So the same as the ones in the center and the corners of each of your blocks. You'd need an additional 18 4.5-inch squares for those rows, and then also some leftover jelly roll strips for a 2.5-inch border, which is why the size, because I wanted you to be able to use leftover jelly roll strips for that, that's why the finished quilt is like 0.5-inch for the finished sizes. So the lap size version 1 was the one I was going to do originally for myself. So it's 20 blocks. And then 5, what I'm calling sashing rows, all made up of those same 4.5-inch squares. And that was to keep it so that I was definitely using scraps to keep it looking scrappy. I like that kind of look of the different fabrics making up the background. You could, of course, do long strips instead. And then in order to make it the size that I thought I wanted, I would need a 6.25-inch border. So that's the unfit. All these sizes are on the unfinished sizes. But I decided I didn't want to cut long border strips, so I'm not doing version 1. So the reason that I have the sashing spacing rows and the borders and some of the other layouts is because I like a lot of negative space in my quilts. But if you don't need that, or you don't like it, or you just want a more straightforward layout for your quilt, you might like lap size version 2. You just make 5 more blocks, so it's 25 blocks, stick them all together in rows, and you've got a 60 by 60-inch quilt. Simple. Okay, version 3 of the lap quilt has got a little gold star in the corner because this is the one that I'm going to make myself. So it's got the 20 blocks, and then it's got 5, again, what I'm calling sashing rows, and end of rows sashing squares. Someone tell me what I should just be calling this instead of sashing, because I know it's not really sashing and you're going to be screaming at me. But basically it's all made of 4.5-inch squares, and you need 109 to fill them in. So it's basically a border of 4.5-inch squares, and then above and in between each row you've got another row of 4.5-inch squares, if that makes it easier to understand. And that's so that I didn't have to find great big long pieces of fabric or piece things or cut into yardage in order to make a border and get me the negative space that I wanted. And just because I don't know when to stop sometimes, here's lap size version 4. So this is 25 blocks. It's basically version 2 with a border of 4.5-inch squares. So you can also go that route if you just want a little bit of something to make it that little bit bigger. If any of you are extreme overachievers, you could attempt a queen size with this. There's obviously lots of different ways you could create a queen size. The one I've gone for is 30 blocks with 6 sashing rows.
and a 5 3/4 inch border. But obviously that will give you a lot of negative space to quilt, and you could instead choose to add another row of blocks or another block on the end sort of thing. But I just wanted to give some sort of a queen size option for those of you with loads of scraps. So I hope you liked one of those layout ideas, or maybe you've got your own version. So let's talk now about what to do if you don't have enough of one color in your scraps to make up your background. And when I say all one color, I mean color. I don't mean fabric. So I'm imagining what would happen if I had run out of black scraps to cut up for my black scrappy background. What could I do, or what could you do if you don't have enough of one color? So this first one was going to be my fallback plan if I didn't have enough black. I was going to do a kind of a checkerboard with some of the blocks in white, but still trying to keep the borders and the sashing rows in black. Another idea, if you had enough fabric to keep the center crosses all the same color, all the same shade, you could have rows of different background colors. So you could do like a stripy quilt. You could probably also do this with different colors in the different blocks, but to my mind, this was cleaner to have the centers the same color. So that's just like one idea. If you run out abruptly, you could do a 3/4 background, 2 different colors in various different ways. There's lots of ways you could obviously play with that idea. This one is all one color, but different shades of the same color, and you can kind of see how you could play with that, those 4.5 inch squares in the border, if you're going to do that, to make it almost like a wider piano key kind of effect and make it look really scrappy. And the last one, in case you're despairing that you're never going to have enough background fabric for any of those ideas, you can just go totally random. But as I said last week, if you're doing that, I would suggest you go with something pretty distinct for the center of your blocks, like low volume white or a super bright color that's very different from the rest of your scraps or something like that.
Okay, so this is where I've got to with the tester blocks, which were these ones. Well, they're here too, but the sort of red and white, and I did white and red and denim. And instead of making more of those, obviously I did have some more red scraps. I wanted to use up these blocks as well that I'd done as part of a kind of experiment. Didn't dislike them, but I just didn't feel like making a whole quilt like that. So what I decided to do was just kind of have a play. And I've done a few other funny blocks. This is red offcuts and scraps that already had fusible on the back. And I've just sort of fused them onto the denim to sort of roughly continue the diamond. Obviously the corners don't match up. These are leftover half square triangles that were a smaller size. They're the same as this one. These were from, not that one, but these ones were from my nephew's train quilt that I showed in my quilts and review video. Anyway, so it's not meant to be, everything's not meant to line up. It's kind of like a trick of the eye, that part. This is the only bit that's pieced together. So this is like the center, or I don't know if it's gonna be the center, but it's part of the quilt top. And then I've got a few more of these blocks to fit in. And then I've got a bunch of these, got way more than this. I've got a bunch of these denim strips that are funny widths and funny lengths from a bundle that I bought probably on eBay. And then I've got lots of leftover denim anyways. So I've been piecing panels like this and this, just randomly, you know, just like, let's sew this to this and then let's trim it up. There's no measurements. It's just totally improv. And then I'm gonna finish it off, just getting my bits here, finish it off in a totally, just see what fits where kind of thing. It's gonna be like a jigsaw kind of a thing. So I'm really having fun with that. I'm liking having the two versions. So when I finished the 20 quilt blocks for the black version, I could have raced ahead and made the quilt top for this week's video, but I'd already kind of set in my mind the pace I wanted the sew along to go. And so the construction I'm gonna do for that one in this coming week. So I had time, so I had to play. So if you end up with a bunch of blocks left, if you don't want to make any of the layouts that I've shown you, then you could just do something fun and improv and just have a play. And it's really fun to just sew things together and not know how it's going to turn out. It's really fun. So I'm hoping to get both that quilt top, no, that quilt, I'm pointing at the design wall, it's over there. The black quilt, I'm going to quilt by the end of the sew along goals, right? This one, I'm hoping to get the quilt top done by the end of the sew along. I'm unlikely to also quilt it, but you never know, but I doubt it. So yeah, so that's how I'm getting on with that one. Okay, so questions and quilt as you go. So quilt as you go, you've got a few options. Obviously, if you want to go to town free motion quilting each block or whatever, you could do a block by block construction of this. There's a few ways to do that. I have a video called, which is fairly long, called 7 quilt as you go methods, no hand sewing. It was part of kind of like a research exercise for myself when I was doing a great big queen size quilt. Anyway, there's timestamps in that video, but you can move around and find the ones you want. If I was doing it block by block, I would probably do the version where you quilt the block with the batting right to the same size as the block, join all of the blocks, and then do a false back and kind of stitch in the ditch around the blocks to attach the backing. That's how I would do it. Obviously, people have different preferences with that, different things they can handle. Some people even, putting the backing through the machine in that way would be too much. So there's definitely other methods in that video, in the 7 quilt as you go methods video. The other one, if I was going to have a second choice from that video, would be the kind with the sashing on the back. So not the sashing, sort of sashing, the joining strips. If you've ever done any kind of quilt as you go, there's a method with joining strips. And they can either show on the front or show on the back. And I would probably do the version that showed on the back because this is already scrappy and busy. So to add another piece of something, for me, my sort of visual aesthetic would be too much. But obviously you do you if you prefer that, or you feel like it would be some, I guess if you had different colors, you might want to frame it in black or something, or frame it in white, Anyway, so those would be the 2 I would probably look at. But as I said, there's 7 methods in that video. So if you're wanting to do it block by block, that's where I would point you to. But actually, if I was actually going to do this quilt as you go, I would absolutely be using the method that I've been calling my new favorite way to quilt as you go. It's based on, if you've ever seen people do quilt as you go on a serger, but I don't have a serger, so I did it on my domestic machine, and I would do it row by row. So I would join all of these blocks in 4 separate rows, and then I would quilt the first one with the backing and the batting, and then I would join the second row with the quilt top of that row, and the backing and the back as a sandwich. It's in another video. So I've got two videos. Like, it's a really simple, I'm making it sound complicated here, right? It's a really simple, easy method, I swear, but to explain it quickly without the visuals is more difficult. So I've got 2 videos. One is my new favorite quilt as you go method, and the other one is part 2 of that, rows and blocks, and that is the one I would point you to. So I'm going to put that in the description. I'll put them both in the description, but I think the second one for this would make more sense. So you're basically quilting a row at a time, and by the time you're finished, you're finished. So you don't have to have a whole bunch of quilt over on the right side of your machine under the throat space if you don't have a lot. So you can be feeding it the other way, right? If that makes sense to you. So it doesn't stop you eventually carrying the bulk of it. So if the reason you do quilt as you go is to avoid that bulk, eventually you will have the whole quilt obviously to deal with in that way, but it does avoid you getting, great big mash of stuff in the throat space of your domestic machine. So anyway, so those are the videos I would point you to for quilt as you go. Okay, questions that I've had. So the first one was about resizing the block. So someone wanted to use 5-inch charm pack squares for the center and the 4 corners. Obviously, then you would be looking to resize the size. I think I answered it in the comments, and I'm not sure I answered it correctly, to be honest. So I'm answering it again. So you're gonna need to add a little bit to your rectangles on either side to make that work. So obviously they'd be 5-inch, but if they were 2.5, then they would be squat of the block, right? So they need to be, I think, 2 3/4. Sorry, not 2 1/4. 2 3/4 each. So 2 3/4 by 5 for the rectangles, I think, is going to get you the right thing. Someone correct me if I've got that wrong. But anyway, the point is you need to keep in mind your seam allowance, and just keep in mind, how that, in order to get the same shape of the cross. The photo in the ones from the readers, the one of the whole quilt top, that was actually, the woman told me she'd sized the blocks down. So she used 4-inch squares and her finished block came out at 9.5 inches. So you can obviously sort of resize that for yourself if you're good with quilt math. I really have to sit down and think about it if I'm going to do it, which is why I picked the ACCUQUILT sizes that I did for the block. But anyway, it's definitely doable. You can totally resize it and make it bigger or smaller depending on what your scraps are. The second, I think the only other question I had was about whether or not you could use a mix of different fabrics in the CRUMB blocks. So the person asking the question was, they make clothing, so they have lots of stretch fabrics, and they knew that, if you put quilt and cotton and then like Lycra, that you might come up with some sort of an issue with the stretch and stuff. But they were wondering, would it reduce the reduce the impact of the stretch, I guess, if it was inside of a CRUMB block, was kind of the question. And I don't really make clothes, so I don't have a whole lot of experience with that. My test blocks were with stretched denim and quilt and cotton. And I use that combination a lot, and I use it without interfacing a lot, and it's fine. So my general approach to any question like that would be try it and see. Basically, I would urge you to do some sort of an experimental block, do one, and then join it to whatever you're thinking of joining it to. Do a few things to it, iron it. Maybe don't wash a block, but you know what I mean? And see what it does, see how it behaves. I mean, it's not the end of the world. It is fabrics, it's scrap fabric, and you'll know at the end of it whether or not you can do that. I'm sorry I can't be more definitive about whether that's going to work or not. Thanks so much for watching this. I hope you're still enjoying the sew along. I would absolutely still love to see more of your progress photos, so keep those coming. You can tag me on Instagram at Scrap Fabric Love and use the hashtag Scrap Fabric Love Sew Along. You can post me a photo on the Scrap Fabric Love Facebook page, and you can email me hello@scrapfabriclove.com, and I would love to see all of those. I hope you'll join me next week for week 3. We're going to be going over constructions. I'll be showing you me constructing the quilt top and finishing that off for the version that I'm doing. And then I'm going to talk about some smaller projects with fewer blocks and what you could do with those. So if you have some leftovers or you didn't quite get to the full quilt top, that's cool. We're going to have lots of options for different amounts of blocks. And then I'm also going to be talking about options for a scrappy backing fabric so that we can get the backing ready so that we can actually quilt it. We're not finishing this quilt top and putting it in the cupboard. We're going to finish it. So next week we're going to be talking about the scrappy backing fabric as well. So I hope you'll join me for that, and I hope you continue to have fun making your blocks and getting a little bit lower down in your scrap fabric pile. Thanks so much for spending time with me, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.